Thank you so much, Marisa, and welcome back, everyone. So we're here for the second part in our two-part series on culturally responsive practice, or CRP, in adult basic education. This part will focus on participatory curriculum. So one option for implementing some of the tenets that we talked about in part one. Before I go into this topic, I just wanted to acknowledge the illustration that Yixiu and I both had on the introduction slide here of our sessions. This is a piece of art from Ricardo Levins Morales, who is a Minneapolis-based artist and organizer who's originally from Puerto Rico. It says, "Nothing about us without us is for us." And this is a slogan that comes from, they think it's originally sourced from a South African disability rights movement led by youth, but it has been adopted around the world as a message coming from marginalized communities that are fighting for their civil rights and for social acknowledgement and respect. And so Morales is a local artist who's internationally known. He has a quote that he uses his art as a form of political medicine to support individual and collective healing from the injuries and ongoing reality of oppression. So we felt like this was very relevant to our discussion today. Just to introduce myself briefly, welcome everyone. My name's Erin Cary. I work as the Associate Director of Lindale Neighborhood Association in South Minneapolis, and I'm an ELL instructor. Currently, I'm teaching intermediate and advanced learners for Lindale Education Program, which is part of Lindale Neighborhood Association. My pronouns are she and her. And working with my students lately, have had a lot of really wonderful discussions. We're a very international group, which I find happens very frequently with my intermediate and advanced learners. We get people from the broad diversity of English learners across South Minneapolis. And so I have people from all different continents, and I'm really enjoying the different perspectives on, we've been talking a lot lately about like workplace discrimination and protections that are in place, but also ways that people can respond and advocate for themselves in the workplace, and to see the different attitudes or innovative ideas for speaking up for themselves that my students bring to that discussion, especially across a range of ages too, is really interesting. I think sometimes we underplay the importance of generational differences in these discussions too. So that's something I'm really enjoying in my classroom right now. So some takeaways that we're hoping will come from this discussion. Considering the benefits of structuring adult basic ed classrooms around learning partnerships and alliances as a culturally responsive practice. And this is something that Yixiu got into toward the end of her session of part one. And then a more concrete example, becoming familiar with the Participatory ABE Curriculum Toolkit, which I'll go into in detail, and then a chance to reflect on the implementation of that toolkit. What could it look like in our classrooms? What would be some of the challenges of it? What pieces could we take from it? And maybe adaptations that might need to be made. Before I get into the questions of the session too quickly, I just want to acknowledge my partner from part one. Yixiu and I put this session together in collaboration, and I just want to say how much I admire the presentation of part one and Yixiu's presentation style in general. I'll always go to any session that she gives because she really embodies this culturally responsive practice in terms of being approachable and bringing across these concepts in such a personal and relatable way, but also always making sure to challenge us and bring questions that we have to, you know, walk away and think about for days and weeks and feel compelled to bring into our teaching practice. So I do appreciate Yixiu so much. Oh, and Andrea is mentioning too, if people are able to change your names to your first and last name, rename your video profile so that we can see who everybody is. That's something that this conference is asking everyone to do. If you're not sure how to do that, you can just message Andrea directly in the chat and she's able to help you. So if you want to check your chat, she may be trying to help you already. Thanks. Okay, so just to chat out a little bit, some of the major takeaways or some of the things that jumped out most to you in the previous session, what are some priorities of culturally responsive teaching practice? What are some, yeah, so I see already assets mindset, very key. What else are you thinking about? Shared power, affirmation and validation, examining implicit bias. Yeah, these are things we kind of have to let this practice transform us. Because the more you think about it, the more you realize this is not something I can just stick in my teaching bag of tricks, like we said, right? It's something that has to kind of get you at a cellular level. Yeah, culture isn't fixed, flexible, not fixed. High expectations, affirming, validating, building trust through listening, very key. Include and involve, being aware and acknowledging differences. White saviorism, very important not to let go of that. The power of knowing that once you know it, you can't unknow it. Actual listening, contextualizing our learning, creating an inclusive environment, right? So I think that also gets into the power sharing. Valuing students' cultures, listening, asking questions, absolutely. Student-centered environment, respectful exchanges and relationships. Yeah, I think that student-centered concept is something that I've always been taught in ABE, and I think ABE is actually very friendly to culturally responsive teaching. We do have a lot to learn and unlearn. At the same time, I think we've been slowly getting to some of these concepts for years, but I think my idea of what learner-centered means has needed to evolve into really valuing the students' contributions equally with those of dominant white culture. Becoming a warm demander. I think that's such a phrase that really grabs you. Yeah. So having high expectations at the same time, knowing that you need to make your students feel safe in their bodies, feel like this is their environment. Acknowledging and moving out of the white privilege and saviorism mindset. If that is not the most important thing to take away, right? Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for all of these very key takeaways, and never stop learning. I couldn't love that more. Okay, so starting to name one of the thinkers behind this movement that I think a lot of us will be familiar with. This is Brazilian adult educator and political activist Paulo Freire. He coined the term conscientizao, or critical consciousness, or I think of it as conscientization. So the development of critical consciousness to describe a pedagogy which aims to liberate both the oppressed and the oppressor. So this is a process that is ongoing, that is always developing and evolving, where the individual moves from naive thinking to critical social consciousness. And I think very important to emphasize that this targets both educators and learners, right? As we develop these learning partnerships with our learners, trying to remove some of the hierarchical thinking that a lot of us were raised with in the classroom, not just in the US, but around the world, because colonialism reached around the world. This is a way of thinking about all of us developing toward being aware of patterns of marginalization, oppression, put in place by forces, the powers that be in our society, in our institutions, and thinking about how to move away from some of that and to push back against it. So I feel like this is something that it's especially powerful to have this example of an adult education leader who popularized this idea, because so frequently we're adapting things from a place of educating children, whereas this is someone who brought international attention to learners like the ones that we have. So a concept that Freire talked about frequently was the banking model of education. Does somebody want to either chat out or unmute yourself and explain? Does someone have an idea what this is and can explain it? Feel free to unmute yourself. Okay, Morgan says the idea that students are empty vessels waiting for teachers to fill them with information. Absolutely, yeah, we can see this kind of embodied in this picture. Yeah, filling students' heads, right? Unidirectional flow of information from teacher to student. Ooh, do I like that phrasing? Teacher deposits information into kids' brains or students' brains, right? Teachers choosing the info that goes in, absolutely. So the teachers are the experts, they're the arbiters of what everyone needs to learn in the classroom. And depending on the teacher's identity, biases, et cetera, that's going to impact what they decide that is important for learners to know. Great. Yeah, students are passive receivers of learning. Yeah, we're really, yes, thank you for bringing all these different aspects of this, this image. Yeah, and I think we can agree that to view your learners as dependent on you in this way, instead of as active participants in their own education who are becoming increasingly independent through that education, who are collaborators, who bring a great deal to the educational process. Unless we see them in that way, we do bring this deficit mindset. We view maybe as educators ourselves as experts, which is inherently dehumanizing to these students, right? If they are passive, uncritical vessels for knowledge, then we are assuming that they lack capacity and that they do not already have great powers to be participants in their own education. Yeah, okay, so I like this comment. Look at how their faces are tilted down. They're shy, afraid, and less than in this picture. Yeah, students are not asked to analyze info and evaluate. They're right, they're passive. They're there for us to plant knowledge into. And of course, yeah, limited critical thinking. So all learners need to become critical thinkers no matter the topics or curriculum. Right, and students, we know that they already possess these abilities. I think in encouraging those activities around critical thinking and bringing your own experience to the classroom, we're supporting a culture and an atmosphere of learning where those assets are acknowledged and treated as part of the educational process. So signaling to students that they are experts on many things. and have much to contribute. Yeah, Yixiu mentions many times ELLs are infantilized because people who don't speak fluent English are many times cast as childlike. I don't know how many times I've heard that from learners, that they had, you know, great accomplishments in their lives. They were very talented, had many, you know, were leaders in their own communities, and then came to the United States and felt like they were being treated as children. So talking about this idea of funds of knowledge, this is, you know, based on, you know, a response to the banking model, that people are competent, people have knowledge, and their life experiences have given them that knowledge. Instruction should be linked to students' lives, and the details of effective pedagogy should be linked to local histories and community contexts. I think it's important to acknowledge that the banking concept is a critique of educational policy, but also through this lens of capitalism, that viewing students as assets is kind of fundamentally problematic. And we'll talk about that a little bit more too. So we have a few examples here of different types of funds of knowledge that students bring to the classroom. For example, we see traditions and values. People bring knowledge of farming, land, culture, cooking and healing practices, language and culture. Of course, we know many of our students are quite multilingual and have experience across multiple cultures and different concepts of economics. Can people think of other funds of knowledge that they have seen from their students? Feel free to chat it out. Entrepreneurship. Oh, I've just been working through that concept with my students, and they have so much to say. Child rearing, parenting, family values, sewing. Oh, yes. Political organizing, global perspective. Yes. Resilience, risk-taking, trauma survival. Boy, absolutely. Resilience, coping skills, having survived political turmoil and real life challenges, the willingness to learn. Absolutely. There's a respect for education that I think a lot of us have much to learn from. Tech skills, advocating for their wants and needs. Yes. College degree and professionalism from their home country. Yes, we see this all the time. Patience, hard work. Geography, yeah, a much better knowledge of geography than I certainly possess. Time management, dedication, stamina, yeah. Valuing community over personal rights. So yeah, this idea of collectivism and doing or having goals around a greater social good than just one's own personal advancement or profits. Sense of humor. I mean, yeah, if you can't broaden your sense of humor by spending time with people from other places in the world, especially having a sense of humor in a second language or without words at all, is a gift. Yeah, prioritizing valuable interests. Yeah, I think, yeah, having a sense of what is valuable in life can often come from different cultures and impact your perspective on the world. Money management, yeah. Balancing work, family, education. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so from across all of these ideas, the idea that we feel as educators that we might have a great deal more to give to our students than they do to us. Of course, you know, you start to reflect on like your own ego and your own need to feel that you have power over people and that you know more than they do, because of course that's a fallacy. So I have a quote here from Freire to transition into the toolkit. he said, the central problem is this: how can the oppressed participate in developing the pedagogy of their own liberation? So this participatory ABE curriculum unit toolkit was the project for my capstone in 2019 at Hamlin. And I started with this question: what is the purpose of adult basic education or adult education? What does that question make you think about? Empowerment. So maybe like a transfer of power. Navigating American institutions, lifelong learning, helping learners achieve their goals, right? Symbiosis of coming together for education, all right, yeah. Mutual learning, meeting the needs of a very diverse group of learners with diverse educational and occupational goals, right? There's so many different individuals represented in every class and different goals. Creating access to greater community. It makes me wonder whether we would ask that question the same way as our students, right? Do they come to our programming with the same type of question that we do? Meeting learners where they're at and helping them move toward their goals. Yeah, these are, the purpose may be different for each student. Equipping people for living well, making, yeah, some people do come for social reasons too, right? To avoid isolation that can happen for immigrants and refugees. Helping people navigate new environments, helping them learn what they want or need to know to achieve their goal for living in the US. Yeah. I'm going to continue from here. So among the many great reasons that you mentioned, one central purpose of ABE instruction is to facilitate learners' independence and ability to advocate for themselves in the workplace, in higher education, and in the community. I think part of the process included in the toolkit is stepping back to reflect and consider these purposes and how to be accountable to them. So in ABE instruction, you know, it is about facilitating independence and self-advocacy. And with the recent demands on ABE instructional planning to perform according to certain accountability measures. For instance, we have a new CASAS test and a newish TABE test to prepare learners for. We have to align to 3 sets of state and federal ABE content standards. It can be easy, you know, we have all these grants and stakeholder expectations around employment level gains, grant deliverables, and on and on. I think it can be easy to lose sight of the reason why we plan instruction at all, which is, as we identified in the chat, to help learners with their goals, the reasons that they come into our classrooms. We are accountable to standards, program expectations, funding sources, stakeholders. However, just like the people in our classrooms are not, as we said, as we reflected on the banking model, they're not receptacles to be filled with knowledge in that sort of banking capitalistic way. They're not also objects to be considered in terms of their financial value to society or as an investment of government money that has to be returned. The people in our classrooms have inherent worth, and their goals must be centralized. We want to sustain healthy programming, of course, right? We have that responsibility also. But as educators, we don't want to start from a point of being sort of instruments that are serving that kind of view of our students. I think our students' value is inherent. Education is a fundamental human right, which is what inspired this participatory curriculum toolkit. Responses to that before I move on? Okay, people may be typing. So I'm going to start talking about the toolkit, and I'll look at the chat to capture some responses. So as I said, I created this as a capstone project, and I will walk briefly through each of these tools. So don't worry, we'll get to them. Yeah, students are not just numbers. Thank you, Bonita. So as an overview, we have a teacher's guide, which I'll open momentarily here. A teacher reflection on learner self-advocacy, which we've done a little bit of work with just now. A learner input gathering lesson plan. A unit design tool template. A blank lesson plan template. A post-teaching unit evaluation and reflection. And a glossary of terms. So I will walk through each of these. Okay, so just to give us a glance at the teacher's guide, it does contain links to all of the other tools. So here there's an overview and a purpose for the entire curriculum toolkit that we've kind of discussed already in this session. And then you can see each of the tools are linked 1 through 6. And each of them is identified as to how it can be used. So how often, at what point in the process should it be used on your own as you develop curriculum, or potentially working as a staff, and how often do you need to return to this? We also have a description of each tool and some suggestions for implementation. So we do have a link in the chat to the whole toolkit. I would say maybe bookmark that, or copy that and take a look later. And we will chat that link out again at the end, so you can grab it at the end of the session. So the first tool is a teacher reflection on learner self-advocacy. How can ABE instructors plan curriculum units that put learners' self-identified goals first, and then allow them to self-determine, self-regulate, and reflect? And these are principles that came from curriculum design and participatory design scholarship that I'm standing on the shoulders of here, and those links to that research are available in the toolkit. So it gives you some questions to reflect on before you start this process, to kind of help set some priorities that will keep things learner-centered and help us think about our own practice and why we develop it as we do. Then there is, this was a biggie for me to develop, a learner input gathering lesson plan. So this is an opportunity to work with your learners to gather their input about what kind of curriculum will serve them best and what are they interested in. So there's a warm-up activity, and this is normed for more of an intermediate level English class, but I have adaptations built in for lower level literacy groups and for more advanced levels. So talking about what is a unit, there's a chance to review some previous units you've done in your class. What were the themes? What did you talk about? What were some of the objectives of those units, so that they can say, oh, okay, so we did a unit about this topic, and I remember we studied this and that. And they have a chance to rank those units about in terms of how important or interesting they were. So I'll just go forward. Here's a worksheet that can be adapted with some units that my site has done over the years about me, health and family, community, at home and around town, food and shopping, job search, work and life. So the students have a chance to reflect on how useful these units were to them. What did they like the best? Okay, and then the second part of, I think I have to go back in my slides here. The second part is an activity around a mind map that will kind of evolve over the course of the lesson. So the students do an activity where they reflect, they do a mingle. Why did they come to English class? Why did they join this class? And put their responses in the first level around the question of this mind map. And then they will do some group brainstorming as a whole group. When and where do you need to use the skills that you just reflected on, that you came to learn? Maybe trying to bring students past I need English, right? What English do you need? What are situations where you need English and you needed more support with it? Or what were situations where your GED was a barrier to you doing what you needed to do, getting a job, etc. So there's some brainstorming and note-taking on the mind map as part of this activity. And they will do some discussion to build a consensus around what areas are sort of the most critical. So maybe grouping some of their brainstorming into categories and voting for the top 2 to 3 that interest them as potential units. What will students practice in this unit to be more independent in their lives? So at this point, they get into small groups and they do an activity where they are preparing or sharing. So you would put, you would choose 2 to 3 areas that could be potential units, have each group assigned to one of those areas and have them brainstorm some potential activities as part of that unit. They have a rubric to grade themselves. Are they getting all of the aspects that are necessary to create a unit? And it's pretty simple, it's pretty approachable. And then have students rate each other's group presentations using that same rubric. So they will present to each other, here's what we came up with for our potential unit themed around this topic. And then other people will say, okay, you did meet this criteria, you did not meet this other criteria, and there's room for discussion. And then the extension or application will be to vote for their top choice. And there's a few mechanisms for voting written into the plan, and revisit some future unit objectives. So what do you want to be able to say at the end of the unit? I can, the sort of student-facing objectives. So this obviously bears some deeper analysis of how you would adapt it to your class. The rubric is built into Lorna, the lesson plan, so you'd have to go look at it directly, but yes, it is included. So you would be able to take that and adapt it as works best for your class. The third component of the tool is a unit design template. So just briefly look at that. So it is pretty elaborate, and you are welcome to use the parts that are useful to you. This is based on backwards design principles and a few other participatory curriculum guidelines that I came across in my research. So you can see at the beginning what you will be identifying the desired results of what students should take away from your unit that you design. So you can see to the left side, it says, what learning goals will this unit build toward, including the learner's self-identified self-advocacy goals. So making sure that right from the beginning, we're bringing in what do the students want to get out of this unit. And you will, of course, bring your skills as a teacher to helping to translate that into a engaging and challenging unit. So transferring the learner's goals to what they should be able to do independently by the end. What will students learn to do? What will students question? What will they build knowledge in? What will they build skills in? Here's where you can bring in standards that will apply to this unit. So those are part of the process and will help form your approach to teaching this content. But of course, we want to consider the student goals first. Opportunities to practice competencies on our tests. What evidence will students show of their learning and of the mastery of standards? What kinds of activities will you build into? So here's this is a learning plan stage of planning. How will students plan practice using multiple modalities? The reason that you see links here is because my sixth part of the toolkit is a glossary of terms. So everything that you see linked has a vocabulary explanation of what it is. How will students access prior knowledge? How will they be engaged toward the learning goals? Classroom routines, how will they be built into this unit? How are lessons scaffolded to facilitate mastery of our content standards and test preparation? There's space for a line of inquiry. And then a unit plan with details about the unit itself. So who's the instructor, course, title of the unit, description, duration, 2 weeks, 1 month, etc. Any other goals, making sure that we're restating the learner identified goals and input. Any comments from learners that you want to include here? Objectives, and you can check here what functions are they producing? Are they reading and listening? What are they doing as part of working toward these objectives? How do they align to standards? And you can check key shifts that apply as well. How are you assessing progress toward these standards? What vocabulary is targeted, and does it fall into tier 1, 2, or 3? So you can see this is pretty comprehensive. This is sort of the dream unit design tool, and I'm sure it's still missing pieces, but I would invite you to use the parts that are helpful to you. What materials, resources, equipment will you need? What accommodations and adaptations are needed? Universal design for learning practices, experiences, and field trips. So whatever is most useful is what makes sense for you.
Erin, I just want to bring attention to one question in the chat. Do you have an example of the rubric?
Oh, I did respond to that. It is included in the lesson plan, so you'd have to look at that. Yeah, I don't have it handy, but it is available to take and use. Yeah. Yeah, and then our fourth tool in the toolkit, there's a blank lesson plan template. This one is a reflection of the unit template at a lesson level. So you can see it's just an opportunity to transfer all of the objectives of your lesson and break it down into a smaller daily or weekly lesson level. And when you're finished teaching the unit, you'll of course want to take time to evaluate and reflect on the experience. How useful was this process? What would you shift or change? What part really was like a revelation and very helpful? So here you can transfer again your unit objectives and then correlate to what degree were they achieved, right? It was not covered. Students can recognize this concept. They can comprehend and reproduce it. They can generalize and apply it. So this is like levels of knowing, right? Depth of knowledge. And students can use concepts creatively to solve problems. What were the biggest successes, evidence of gains in learner independence and self-advocacy? What other strengths should be included if you choose to repeat this? And what should be reconsidered? I also think there's space here for you to include student comments if you wanted to evaluate the unit with a survey in your class, then you could include some learner feedback here. And finally, as I mentioned, there's a glossary of terms. So you can see any of the terms that we may have learned at some point, but need a little reminding of are available in this glossary. Oop. Okay, so we're toward the end of our time, but I did want to make sure that there was an opportunity for questions or thoughts. You're welcome to either text or drop your questions into the chat or unmute yourself and ask a question. I know we did have to go through it pretty quickly, but we will drop the link and I will share some resources momentarily so that you can look at this in more detail. Thank you, Andrea. So here's a link to the toolkit. It's on the IMABE website anytime if you need it. So if you lose the link, just Google IMABE and you should find our Google site, and it's under curricula. Okay, so Julie has shared, Paulo Freire contributed a philosophy education which blended classical approaches stemming from Plato and, sorry, I'm having trouble not like going up and down the chat. Post-Marxist and anti-colonialist thinkers. His pedagogy of the oppressed can be read as an extension of or reply to Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth, which emphasized the need to provide native populations with an education which was simultaneously new and modern rather than traditional and anti-colonial, not simply an extension of colonializing culture. So Freire considered the contemporaneous Chinese Cultural Revolution an exemplar of his notion of cultural action and praised Mao Zedong's innovations to Marxist theory and practice. Very fascinating. So yes, we all need to be critical thinkers. We need to challenge all sources, even the ones that have something to teach us, also have things that we need to be aware of and consider the influences on. Yeah, thank you, Maya. Yeah, I'm hoping to hear from folks who have an opportunity to use this toolkit and to see if it brings any surprises or opportunities for innovation to all of our teachings. I will continue to evolve this as I use it. Do I have lessons using this model? So I don't typically write out my lesson plans from day to day. I've done this as an opportunity for learning for myself to try it. But, you know, I mean, I know this is not something people can write out a lesson for every single day. But I have used these tools before. I think, Sarah, if you wanted to reach out to me, I'm just putting my email in the chat. I'm happy to share what I have. What class sizes are typically most effective for participatory curriculum development? It seems like smaller, higher level students. You know, I think that I think that this is very possible to use with more beginning literacy classrooms. I mean, it can be hard to share in detail, maybe, or more extensively, some of the things that students may want to share. And if there are opportunities for interpreters to be part of this, that might be great. But I do think we all know how to have discussions with our learners that we can take away a little more firsthand perspective on what they're looking for. But yeah, I mean, of course, what I directed these tools toward was my own intermediate and advanced students. So adaptations are written into the toolkit, but they're not comprehensive. So I would be happy to work with anyone on how to adapt the toolkit. Yeah. And as far as class sizes, I don't know. I almost feel like the larger your class, the more interesting feedback you might get. I mean, we're asking students to work in groups and then as a large group and to present to each other. I feel like you might get a really strong diversity of options and opinions with a larger group.
It looks like we're at the end here. So if you do have additional questions that Erin didn't get a chance to answer, feel free to reach out to her.
Okay.
I'll let you finish up here, Erin, and then we'll need to let people go to the next
Thank you.
session.
Sorry. Yeah, thanks, Marisa. I was going to have us do a poll, but maybe this is something to take away and think about which part of this toolkit might be most useful to you. Is it the whole thing? Is it only the self-reflection? Is it only the lesson plan? Do you just want to, see what can be added to your teaching by the unit design tool or the option to evaluate your learning toward the end? Yeah, good. Yeah, and as Marisa says, this whole session is available in the Sketch app. So you are welcome to take and use it. It's also available on the IMABE website. So we have some sources here. Freire, information about funds of knowledge, of course, the Zaretta Hammond book. These are sources to benefit people who attended either of our sessions today. And please do get in touch with us directly. Our emails are in the top right corner here. If you had further questions or wanted to talk or develop these ideas further, we're always happy to collaborate. I think I will speak for Yixiu. We're happy to collaborate. Thank you everyone for your attention, and sorry for going over, but have a great conference and appreciate your time.